All right, good morning, everyone. We'll get started with the briefing today on tomorrow's strong cold front, Tuesday and into Wednesday. So my name is David Glenn with the National Weather Service here in Newport Mord City. This is our briefing that we sent out earlier this morning. So we'll just jump into this. What's our greatest impacts? What are we anticipating with this system? Significant strong winds. I'm going to show you some maps. Then we're also going to talk about timing of those winds and how those winds are going to translate into coastal issues from high surf, ocean overwash, and coastal flooding along the Outer Banks and into our Sound counties. Potential for severe weather as well. We'll talk about the timing with that, and also the impacts on marine areas. So we'll get started here with the winds. Areas that you see in the brighter browns here, that's where we already have a high wind warning in effect. Areas a little bit internal or interior of that is locations for our high wind watch. And then along our more interior counties, that's our wind advisory. And so one thing to keep in mind is areas that you see in the high wind watch are locations where we're still fine tuning the forecast. And later today, those areas will either be wind advisories or they'll become high wind warnings. So once we get a little bit more fine tune on the forecast with that, we'll get that out later this afternoon on the update. Here's our peak wind forecast right now. This is our peak wind gust in miles per hour. So you can see it's highlighted there, especially along our coastal areas. Wind gusts in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, and potential for wind gusts up into the 70 mile per hour range with this system. For timing, wanted to look at this a little bit. This is from our hourly weather graph, which you can get off weather.gov. You put in your zip code, you can get the forecast where you're at. This gives you an idea of timing. I wanted to go through a couple places and give you a spot here a little bit more internal with Greenville, and then Swan Quarter, Cape Hatteras, and all the way down here closer to us here in Beaufort. So you can see the winds inland peak in that 40 to 45 mile an hour range. And then Swan Quarter, we're closer to 50 to 55, closer to 60 miles an hour in those areas. Same thing with Cape Hatteras and down here in Beaufort. One of the things that we really wanted to point out is the winds are going to start out southeasterly, switch to southerly later this afternoon and later tomorrow afternoon, Tuesday afternoon into Tuesday evening, and then into Tuesday night into Wednesday, they shift more westerly. What's unique with this system versus the previous systems that we've had this winter or fall so far is that the magnitude of the winds are fairly strong on the front side. As you can see, we've got some quite a bit of wind here in that 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. time frame for all our locations. And then when we shift more westerly on the backside, once the front gets through here, we shift more westerly. We still have some gusty winds, but the trajectory is all from the west or the southwest. So initially we were worried about coastal flooding issues along the ocean side, and then once the winds shift direction, we're worried about what's going on the sound side of the Outer Banks. But since I mentioned coastal flooding, let's go ahead and jump into some graphics here with that. So for the Pamlico Sound, Pamlico River, up in those areas, you can see we've got highlighted there in orange. That's the coastal flood warnings that we have in effect for 2 to 4 feet above ground level, areas that are normally dry adjacent to land. That's where we're expecting some of the highest amounts, and along the coast from Ocracoke north to roughly Pea Island, Oregon Inlet. Those areas are going to have the greatest potential for coastal flooding with the 2 to 4 feet as well. Also, ocean overwash and potentially impacts to Highway 12. We're obviously aware of some of the issues where the northern Ocracoke Island, and then some of the more vulnerable locations between Frisco and Hatteras. And then, as I mentioned, as the winds shift southerly and southwesterly to even westerly, that's when we're worried about what's going to happen on the sound side of the Outer Banks. And that's why we also have 2 to 4 feet along the sound side portions once the front gets east of the area. Later Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. So for southern areas, the wind field is still going to be strong. Duration's a little different. The geography is a little different. We're at 1 to 2 feet above ground level for these coastal portions south of Oregon Inlet, and for the southern portions of, or you can see the areas adjacent to the Pamlico and southern Beaufort counties. Moving on to our next threat here is severe weather potential. So we have isolated to scattered severe thunderstorms possible Tuesday afternoon and Tuesday evening. If you look there, this puts us on our 3 out of 5 scale, so enhanced risk for severe thunderstorms. One thing we want to highlight with this is we may have storms come through that produce gusty winds that actually don't have thunder with them, because this is a very strong wind field with this cold front as it's coming through. So don't be surprised if we get damaging winds and you actually don't hear any thunder, or you don't have thunderstorms where you are. We do have damaging wind gusts possible of 70 miles per hour or greater, and a few tornadoes. The tornado threat is actually later in the evening into Tuesday night. So What we always like to say with that is the potential for issues to occur at night. We want to make sure you have multiple ways to receive warnings. So make sure you have no weather radio, you got your TV turned on, you have radio turned on, you have your cell phone, you have ways to receive wireless emergency alerts if we issue a tornado warning for your area. So moving on to rainfall, we're looking at 1 to 2 inches mostly, maybe a few spots isolated 3. This is a little bit lower than what we had a day or so ago, but that's kind of what happens when we get closer to the event. We get more tuned into what's actually going to happen. So heaviest rainfall expected Tuesday night, mostly 1 to 2 with isolated 3. That could cause some potential issues for any low-lying or areas that are typically vulnerable to heavy rainfall in a short period of time. Lastly, here we'll talk about our marine headlines. You see we have storm warnings. These are fairly rare for Eastern North Carolina. We only get these a few times a winter typically. And then for our inland rivers and Albemarle Sound, Alligator River, we have storm watches similar to the high wind watch. It's an area where we're still fine tuning the forecast. These later today will either become storm warnings or gale warnings. We're still fine tuning the forecast on that, and we'll have an update for that later today. You can look at the timing as well. It's tomorrow afternoon, or excuse me, tomorrow late afternoon into Wednesday. And that's going to turn into some very large seas off the coast, 20 to 25 feet you can see there, and some closer to the coast in the teens range. And now I'll finish with this just to let you guys read this. I didn't want to start out with a bunch of text for the presentation. I wanted to start out with the images and just verbalize what we anticipated with the forecast. You can see all the details in here, and this hasn't changed from what we sent out with the briefing earlier this morning between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. So that's pretty much what I have for now. I'll leave it open for you guys. If you have questions, I'll be able to unmute you and then allow you to ask the question. So we'll open it up to anybody else if you have any questions.